If you were to visit your son's grave on his death anniversary and find a young waitress weeping there alongside a stranger child, what would you think? That is precisely what happened to Thomas Blake, a millionaire living in his hilltop mansion, a man who never let anyone near the raw pain of losing his child. But on that drizzly afternoon, the arrival of these two strangers tore apart everything he thought he knew about his past, and what he is about to uncover will change the rest of his life forever. All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a story that will leave you speechless. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly resonate with what I'm sharing here. And drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people join us from all around the world. Thomas Blake was once the epitome of success. Buildings bearing his name stretched across southern towns in a blaze of classic red brick. Within them, stately boardrooms where he signed deals, conversed with investors, and produced figures the press called miracles. His image, side by side with his son, Liam, graced a renowned scholarship campaign, their shining faces set against a university's emerald backdrop. Yet what no photograph could capture was the emptiness gnawing at him from within. Liam died at 21, a swift, violent end that left a void no remedy could fill. Thomas shed no tears at the funeral. He shook hands with mourners, welcomed the media, spoke in measured tones. Only afterward, in the vast, nameless emptiness of his mansion, did he truly see Liam's face taped to the walls, haunting his dreams and his solitude. But he never spoke aloud. He never allowed himself to admit. He missed his son. And today at the cemetery he visited each year, where he placed a solitary bouquet and whispered apologies in silence, something was different. Not a feeling, a presence. A young woman, her hair hastily tied back, her apron a faded red, sat with her head bowed beside Liam's headstone. Next to her, a boy sorted tiny pebbles as if constructing something sacred. Thomas froze. His gaze clung to the child. There was something in those eyes that made his heart falter. Not curiosity, but the collision of a memory refusing to fade. The same eyes Liam had at 8, when he sat in his father's office, brandishing a homemade cardboard airplane. The woman looked up. Tears still pooled at the corners of her eyes. She met his gaze, direct and calm, as though she had rehearsed this moment for years. Her voice was low and measured, peeling away the layers of a buried truth. She spoke without explanation, without excuse. Only a single fact, placed before him like the pebble on a gravestone. Her name was Grace. She worked at Ruby's diner. She had loved Liam. And the child beside her, his name was Eli, was his son. Thomas did not react at once. He neither shouted nor questioned. He simply stood still, as though his body resisted the storm brewing inside. His mind reeled with fractured images, dinners missed, birthdays uncared for, Liam's phone calls left unanswered while Thomas negotiated deals. He had always thought he would have time, someday, once everything settled, once the company was secure. But that someday never came. Now this child with Liam's eyes stood before him, an irrefutable reminder that life does not wait for contracts to be signed. Grace did not demand anything. Her tone held no accusation. She did not lament her hardship, nor threaten, nor manipulate. She simply wanted Liam to be fully remembered, not only as the son who had passed, but as the father who had once loved. Thomas looked at Eli again. The boy met his gaze without flinching, standing straight, clutching the pebble as though awaiting something more definitive than his mother's words. No questions, no cries. Yet that silence overwhelmed Thomas. This child was his grandson, the continuation of the son he had lost. Thomas's life had been shaped by numbers, by towers of steel and glass, by maps of influence. Yet in that instant, every structure he had built crumbled under the silent presence of a child arranging stones on his father's grave. No one spoke further. None was needed. Some truths, once voiced, demand no reply. They need only acknowledgement. And standing there, confronted by the cost of his absence, Thomas understood that he could not erase the past. But he could begin something new, if this boy would let him. Grace recounted the story in a low, steady, dry tone, as though each memory had been compressed into a drawer of her mind, waiting for the day it would be opened. She was a part-time waitress at a small diner just beyond the university dorms. Late shifts, hands perpetually stained with grease and cheap coffee. She dreamed of nothing grand. Simply, she struggled to get by each day. Liam entered her life without fanfare. No luxury car, no bodyguard, no illustrious name preceding him like a shadow. He arrived alone, hood drawn over his head, clutching a book, always ordering the same meal. No one recognized him as a millionaire's son, and he never revealed it. The way he sat quietly at the counter, the way he listened when Grace lamented her sister's unpaid tuition, all of it made him different, trustworthy. They began with a few brief exchanges. Then those stretched into nights of conversation after closing time, when the diner's lights went dark and only the hum of the dishwasher remained. Liam was not flashy, made no promises, and never pretended. He was simply himself, a young man seeking his place in a vast, indifferent world. And though Grace was initially guarded, she gradually lowered her walls. Love arrived quietly, not like a gust of wind through a window, but like a soft exhale as they both drifted off on the diner's old sofa. A hand held at the end of Grace's shift. A smile when Liam spoke of opening a small art gallery in an underprivileged neighborhood. Those fragments of happiness, however small, were enough to make her believe they might have a future. There was only one thing. He never told his father. Liam feared Thomas. Not a child's fear of punishment, but a deeper dread. The fear of rejection, of being dismissed, of being cut off. Thomas always expected him to study business, to inherit the family fortune, to preserve the empire he had bled for. But Liam was different. He did not care for wealth. He only wanted to live truthfully. And he knew that, in his father's world, that equaled failure. Liam never spoke of Grace, nor of the child they were expecting. He said he would wait for the right moment. Perhaps after Grace gave birth to Eli. Perhaps once he'd secured his own scholarship or rented a place without needing the Blake name. But that right moment never arrived. Because a sudden accident cut everything short. Grace remembered the day she received the news with crushing clarity. She could not believe it. She did not understand it. She did not know what else to do except walk into the high-rise where Thomas Blake's office sat on the top floor. She was not permitted to see him. She left a message with the receptionist. She repeated her name, her number, and 3 words. About Liam, urgent. No one called back. No one. Time passed. The pain shifted from paralysis to silence. Grace had no right to enter their world. She gave birth to Eli in a modest hospital, raised him on 2 jobs, and resolved to expect nothing. She kept her secret, not out of bitterness, but because she didn't know if Thomas would want to know. He had not listened. He had not answered. He had not cared. so why should she speak? But then, Eli grew up, and every time he tilted his head in thought, those pale green eyes fixed intently on something, Grace saw Liam. Unmistakably, the gentle intelligence, the silence laden with emotion, all replayed like a looping film she could not turn off. When Eli asked for the first time, "Who is my father?" Grace knew she could not remain silent. She did not lie, but she had nothing to give him beyond a name and an unfinished story. That was why she came to the cemetery that year, on Liam's death anniversary. Not to seek anything, but to let Eli stand before his father, even if only a stone marker. She never expected to encounter Thomas, and she never expected, when she looked at his face, to see not a powerful millionaire but a father, suddenly awakened from a long dream by the sharp sting of regret. She did not speak to demand, she only needed him to know. She only needed Eli to know he was never the ending, but the unwritten next chapter. Thomas returned to the little diner where he had first met Grace. Not for the coffee, nor for that rickety wooden chair in the corner, but because of something else, nameless, formless, yet insistent. At first he simply stood outside the door, peering through the glass, waiting to see Grace glide by with her food tray, or Eli hunched over his homework at the back table. No one recognized him as Thomas Blake, the millionaire once splashed across business magazine covers. Here he was just an old man, quiet and alone. Then, almost without planning, he walked in. The first time he came to say hello. The second time he brought Eli a box of muffins, not the expensive kind from a luxury hotel, but simple buttery sponge cakes, the very ones Liam had adored as a child. He placed the box on the counter, exchanged a few polite words, and slipped away unnoticed. On subsequent visits, he brought old comic books, color prints faded along the spine, that Liam had hidden in his school desk. He offered no explanation. Silently, he left them, tucked into a corner of the counter. Occasionally, he'd add a short handwritten note. Liam laughed all day over this one. Eli watched him warily at first. No words, no rush to accept, but he never refused. And that was the beginning. Thomas was not born a doting grandfather. He had never learned gentleness, nor the patience to care for a child. Yet, he began to learn. He learned to listen when Eli described a school test. He learned to rewind the old VCR so they could watch short home movies of Liam as a boy, films Thomas had seen before, but never truly watched. Once, Eli asked if Liam had ever been afraid of the dark. Thomas stiffened for a moment, then nodded. The boy smiled softly. It seemed, in Eli's mind, that knowing his father feared what he feared drew them closer. They spent many afternoons together. Sometimes neither spoke, yet they gazed in the same direction. Thomas no longer felt discomfort in the silence. Instead, he sensed healing in those moments of shared stillness. One evening, when Grace worked late, Thomas helped Eli prepare for his first day of middle school. The boy fumbled with his tie, small fingers twisting the fabric as the long ends slipped from his grip. Thomas stepped forward, sat down before him, and his rough, weathered hands gently guided the tie around Eli's neck, folding, looping, knotting. It was a gesture he had performed for Liam only once, and never again. Back then, he had been in too much of a hurry. Liam had just finished 6th grade, supposed to attend the private school Thomas had chosen. The boy hated the white shirt, and hated being forced to wear a tie even more. Thomas had snapped, insisting, "Those are the rules." He never apologized for that, and Liam never asked him again how to tie a tie. This time, when he finished the knot for Eli, the boy did not look into the mirror. He looked into Thomas's eyes and asked, in a soft voice, almost a whisper, "Do you think my dad would be proud of me?" That question was like someone grabbing Thomas's hand and pulling him back through the years he had lost, back to the silent disappointment in Liam's eyes, to the moments he had missed dinners, missed birthdays, missed sun. Thomas did not answer right away. He studied Eli, saw Liam's features mirrored in that small face, the deep, clear eyes, the calm expression carrying hope, the slight tilt of the head waiting for a response. It was all too familiar, unbearably so. Then, in a voice rough with emotion, he answered, "Without a doubt, your dad would be very proud of you." Eli smiled, a smile as soft as a breath. No cheering, no tears, just a small nod. But for Thomas, it was the most miraculous moment he had ever experienced, not because it erased his failures, but because it gave him the chance never to repeat them. Dear viewers, please take a moment to relax or sip a glass of water, and then stay tuned. There are more surprises ahead. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from every corner of the world. Comment 1. If you enjoyed this story, so we can bring you many more captivating tales. Grace handed Thomas an old box, its edges frayed and dulled by time. It wasn't heavy, yet Thomas felt as though he were holding a piece of memory he had never dared touch. Inside lay loose sheets of paper, the ink smudged and fading, a few simple sketches, fragments of jottings, half-finished sentences, all the remnants of a young mind mid-journey to becoming itself. One of those pages silenced Thomas. It was a rough blueprint for a small art studio. The lines were unfinished, the annotations unclear. Yet in the lower corner, Liam's handwriting was unmistakable, full of meaning. For Grace and Eli. The name of his grandson, the name of the woman his son once loved, and the truth standing before him, undeniable. Liam had planned this for them. A modest, private plan, yet sincere. Not a grand legacy like Blake & Koning, not a towering skyscraper or prestigious development, simply a small place to create, to live authentically, to love. A world Liam never dared bring to life. Thomas said nothing. His hand traced the pencil strokes as if his son stood behind him, exhaling softly on his shoulder, whispering of the dream he had nurtured. Then Grace handed him another sheet. Not the blueprint, but a hurriedly scribbled note, scrawled unevenly. Liam had felt watched. Not once, but repeatedly. Words he had whispered in the dark when anxiety constricted his chest. Grace remembered that night clearly. He had burst into her small apartment, chilled to the bone, his eyes fixed on his phone. He said someone threatened him, that if he did not withdraw from the volunteer project with impoverished students, they would make him regret it. Thomas asked nothing further, yet within him an undercurrent surged. The project Liam supported provided legal aid and media advocacy for families facing land seizure. The very tract Blake & Company planned to redevelop into luxury housing. Thomas had read the reports. He recalled the project's name. He remembered who oversaw it. Rick Dalton. Rick was no stranger. As the company's deputy director, he had been Thomas's right hand for over a decade. A man who knew how to placate investors, expand land holdings, and above all, how to clear the path for difficult deals. Thomas had always admired Rick's decisiveness, but now something nameless rose within him. He recalled an internal meeting months ago when Rick spoke of Liam in a tone almost mocking. "He's too sensitive. He shouldn't meddle in matters that aren't his concern. At the time, Thomas had nodded. He offered no defense for his son. He assumed it was simply a generational clash. Now, he was no longer sure. He thought of Liam's panic-stricken eyes, as Grace had described, thought of that dream for a tiny studio, buried beneath legal documents, signed contracts forged behind the backs of illiterate, impoverished families. If anyone wanted Liam silenced, that person could not be unknown to Thomas. And if someone terrified his son, Thomas, by his absence and silence, had unwittingly lent his hand to it. The little box remained open on the table. Among the folded papers lay the clearest evidence of the life Liam had yearned for. Not opulent, not corporate, not boardroom-bound, but evenings spent sketching in cramped quarters, the sound of his laughter echoing from a corner, and the simple peace that followed. Thomas closed the box quietly. His heart no longer burned with anger, but a silent sorrow that swelled within him. A sorrow not just for the loss of his son, but for standing so near those who had driven Liam to the brink, and for staying silent when he should have spoken up, when he should have believed his son. Now he was uncertain whether the full truth could ever be laid bare. But he knew this. He could no longer turn away. He could no longer live as though he did not know. He could no longer allow the past to be forgotten as a fading ink blot. Liam had left him a clue, and Grace had placed it in his hands. It was time for him to face it, just as the first time he had truly seen his son. Thomas could not remain still after what he had learned. The old papers in Liam's box had unlocked more than one memory. They had flung open the door to a truth he never wanted to accept, yet could no longer ignore. He hired a private investigator, someone unconnected to the company's network, immune to influence from power or money. Thomas needed the truth, not excuses. The reports arrived in fragments, dripping in, as cold and hard as steel. Rick Dalton, the deputy director who had been his right hand, who sat beside him signing hundreds of contracts, was behind the notorious land deal that Liam had tried to stop. Rick did not pull the trigger directly, but he orchestrated every move, pulled the strings behind the scenes, coerced and skirted the law so the project would proceed unimpeded. And Liam, somehow, had discovered it. Perhaps in a stray email, an offhand meeting, a document not yet hidden. And then, the car. The investigator reported in a low, unvarnished voice. The brake system had been tampered with. A tiny, expertly made incision, so subtle no one suspected a thing. The accident was no accident. It was a warning, a calculated act meant to push Liam off the path he had chosen. An unannounced death, yet far from random. Thomas read the report with shaking hands. His vision blurred, yet his mind remained razor-sharp. There was no more room for denial, no loophole to twist. His son had died not by fate, but by a chain of decisions made by those he once trusted, and among them stood Thomas himself, silent, indifferent. He went to the office, no call ahead, no appointment, simply walked in, as a father unable to endure another second. Rick sat behind his desk, exuding the same confident air as always. But his eyes froze when he saw Thomas carry nothing but a file clutched tightly in his hand. There was no greeting, no small talk. Thomas threw the file onto the desk, and for the first time in many years he looked at Rick as though he were a stranger. There was no need to ask. The answers lay there, plain as the words on every page. Rick denied everything, but his denials rang hollow. His voice rose with tension as he scrambled to defend himself, claiming he did not kill Liam. He only intended to apply pressure. Everything spiraled beyond his control. Thomas stopped listening. His anger was not a fleeting flare, but a smoldering force, like magma coursing unseen, needing only a spark to erupt. He drove his fist into the desk. The sharp sound echoed through the room that had once hosted his decisions. A room that saw hundreds of contracts, thousands of signatures. Now it witnessed the blow of a father realizing his own machinery had killed his son. No one stopped Thomas as he left the room. He took every shred of evidence to the police, every detail, every copy. He held nothing back. He spared no mercy. Rick was arrested within that week. The press erupted. The company reeled as its stock plummeted. The board scrambled to appease public outcry. But Thomas no longer cared. He appeared for the last time in the office, not to explain, but to sign his resignation. No press conference, no justification. Only a single line in his letter to the board. I failed in my duty, to the company and to my son. He departed the building in silence. The elevator that once carried him to the top floors now descended slowly and heavily. He carried nothing but a small box, not reports, not contracts, but the unfinished designs, the incomplete notes, the dreams of a son murdered by adult silence. Thomas stepped outside without looking back. He knew the years behind him were irretrievable, but the time ahead, he vowed, would be lived differently, not for profit, not for fame, but for a belated promise to Liam, to Eli, to himself, that even if he started late, he could still do right. And this time, he would not close his eyes and look away. 1 year later, the elementary school auditorium erupted in sustained applause as children took turns stepping up to receive their graduation certificates. Thomas stood at the back of the room, unassuming, no longer carrying the air of a millionaire. His dark, simple suit and neutral tie framed eyes that followed only one face: Eli's. The boy climbed onto the stage, clutching his certificate tightly, his mouth breaking into a genuine, radiant smile. Yet what moved Thomas most was not the spotlight or the music, but the way Eli looked up toward him, as if to say, I see you. I know you're here. After the ceremony, when the crowd had dispersed, Thomas handed Eli a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay the very blueprint Liam had once sketched. The same lines, the same handwriting, now accompanied by a simple new line, written in Thomas's own hand, in plain black ink. For Eli, just as your father dreamed. Eli opened the box, his eyes widening. He said nothing. He only drew Thomas down into a quiet embrace. No explanation needed, no excess words. In that hug, Thomas felt as though Liam lived on, within their blood, within their memories, within this child's breathing. They did not simply keep that design as a keepsake, they brought it to life. 3 months later, the Liam Blake Arts Center opened in a renovated old building in a once-forgotten neighborhood. Not grand, not ostentatious, but each brick laid with the determination of 3 people who had lost someone they loved, and who sought to mend that loss with something kinder. Grace, still wearing her apron, still managing the front desk each morning, now served as the center's director. She coordinated classes, arranged schedules, oversaw volunteers. The first students were children from immigrant families, students with disabilities, young lives marginalized by the public school system. They possessed nothing but their imaginations and their hunger to be heard. Here, they painted, they sang, they told their stories. Thomas became a patron, no longer a CEO, no longer confined to spreadsheets. Now he sat quietly at the back of classrooms, observing, supporting each brushstroke, each palette. He began to understand that sometimes healing does not come from speeches, but from the repetition of doing what is right, even when it is small. Eli changed as well. He was no longer merely a student. He became part of the center's core. He told the other children about his father, not with tears, but with pride, that his father had drawn this dream, and his grandfather had made it real. Grace and Thomas were not lovers. They did not need to be. They were two pieces stitched together by loss. They did not walk side by side like a couple, but they walked together like a family. A family forged by effort, not perfection. Thomas still awoke each morning with an unnamed regret, but it no longer weighed him down. Now he channeled that feeling into motivation. He had lived in a world of success, fame, power, and he had lost his son while defending those very things. But now he chose a different path, and that choice made all the difference. Life does not grant second chances to start over, but it always grants us the chance to begin doing right, from the moment we realize we have been wrong. Where are you watching this story from? How old are you? Have you ever felt like Thomas, yearning to repair something you missed? If so, please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe so you can watch our next stories. And if this tale touched your heart, share it with your loved ones and friends across America. We would love to know when and where you watched this video, because every connection we make is a way to keep small dreams, like Liam's, like Eli's, alive forever.